It is the awareness of the Spirit of God be upon you that is really worship. That's what we mean when we talk about worship. It is an experience of oneness. So my title this morning is Turn the Other Cheek. Now, I've shared with you in the past that I grew up in Detroit, and you don't know really a thing about yourself. You know, people say, no, you didn't come from Detroit. Let me tell you something. You don't make up that you came from Detroit. You don't tell that story. You know, you say, I'm from San Francisco, I'm from the city, I'm from New York, but you don't say you came from Detroit unless you came from Detroit, okay? But the thing is that I realized once I moved away that it was tough, and I had my own issues of being a little tough, right? I just didn't realize it, but it is a tough place, and we are all products of our environment. I was very proud of being able to say anything to anyone that I felt I should be able to say. And I took total license with that. Now, I don't curse now, and I didn't then, but I had a lethal tongue. Why? Just let me tell you a story. So in my last semester of school, I went to work at a very large hospital, and the director was Bulgarian. And he was from Eastern Europe, and so he was kind to me, actually quite kind to me. But he had a mouth on me. And so he said to me one time, he said, Riki. That's how he talked to me, Riki. It must be difficult for you to walk into a room and know that people judge you. And they don't judge me until I open my mouth. I am now redeemed, and I'm a lot nicer than I was then. I said, no, the difference is this. When I walk into a room, they underestimate me. They overestimate you. Now, the question is, I was lethal, y'all. Lethal. My father said, somebody is just going to shoot you in your mouth one day. And I know exactly why it happened, because you ran your mouth. So why did I behave that way? Did I behave in fear, or did I behave in faith? Maybe I just had a chip on my shoulder, and maybe that chip was as large as a redwood. So I'm not sure who was necessarily calling for love in that experience, but obviously I needed some love, right? So why did I respond with such venom? What was in me that made me behave that way? Did I respond in faith, or did I respond in fear? I am using the book Defund Fear, Safety Without Policing, Prisons, and Punishment by Zach Norris from Oakland. This is a tall aspiration. This is vision, but I think we're people of vision. I think that's what we do, is we vision for a world that's better than it is right now, a world that works for everyone. Defunding fear invites each one of us to recognize that our families and our communities are much more important than we really recognize. It's the restoration of individuals that happens in the context of a community. It doesn't happen in the context of an institution. It's like you can watch us online. We've all been online, and that's one experience. But there's a totally different experience being here in community. Because the Spirit moves, we feel the energy and the revitalization, and there's something special. So you're always welcome to join us. But this restoration occurs in the context of community. So he calls about a time for an end of policing in the fashion that we do it, and the prisons that we have for youth of all things. Learned a lot from this experience, all in California, by the way. So Zach is an attorney, and he works at the Ella Baker Center in Oakland, and he's worked there for 20 years, recently retired from there, and he's the executive director. He's always lived in Oakland, and says he was born in San Francisco, and he lived in the perfect place of Oakland except for 1 week of his life. And that was when he was born. He loves Oakland, and so he's very committed to it. Now, Ella Baker was a human rights social justice worker who worked behind the scenes with Malcolm X, with MLK, Martin Luther King, as well as Stokely Carmichael. She hung out with all the power of working on civil rights. She was a grassroots organizer that worked within communities to necessarily galvanize people to work toward civil rights. Now, Zach, the author of the book, had a transformational experience that happened to him while he was an undergrad at Harvard. So our spiritual principle says, treat people the way you want to be treated. Simple as that. It is a principle in every wisdom, faith, tradition. The same thing is said in one way or another. It is uniform. You treat people the way you want to be treated. Now, but are we treating people the way we want to be treated? What about the people that have offended us or the people who've done things against us? Do we still treat them the way we want to be treated? And in this context, do we treat teens the way we think they should be taken care of? Should a system create opportunity for them or make them criminals? I think it's opportunity. Our fear should not limit their potential. This includes situations where we have not been treated fairly. Now, Jesus' teaching is contrasted to the traditional teaching of the time that said a life for a life and an eye for an eye. So he says, no, that's really not the way it is. It is forgive the person who works against you and turn the other cheek. And at another time, we'll talk about the subversive nature of turning the other cheek, but that's not this morning. So if someone hits you on a cheek, it just is to identify that they're superior to you. It almost recognizes this caste system that was operative even at that time. But we have to choose not to submit to that kind of behavior, to not embrace the oppression of other individuals, that even when we have been offended, we are supposed to behave in the way that we want to behave. Violence is never the way. Violence is never the way. Never. Now, we cannot submit our thinking to the ways of the world. The world just has different ideas. There's not necessarily vision. There's a lot of control issues there. There's a lot of projecting onto other individuals what is right and wrong. But the thing here is how do we behave? How do we use the power that we have in the world that we're in? And let me remind you again, in the world that you are in, you are the light of the world. You bring the light into that situation, and if you don't bring it into that situation, more than likely it's not there. So just remember that it's a tall responsibility that we have, but it's also a joyful responsibility that we have. The battle is always for our minds. Now, Jesus did not stop with the cheek teaching. He talked about a number of comparisons about the people of faith and how they should necessarily behave. And he summarizes and gets to the point at the end of this dialogue called the Sermon on the Mount and says, treat people the way you want to be treated. No exceptions, but we live in a culture of fear. It is our culture of fear working for us. Does it make us feel secure and safe? Does it really stop crime? 70% of the people who are released from prison end up back in prison within 5 years. A combination of being a part of the system, sometimes unjustly prosecuted, and in other situations, it's just become normative. So the system is designed, though, to create this fear. The only way it works is if we are afraid. That's the only way the system works. Now, there are two types of justice. There is retributive justice and restorative justice. Retributive justice is an eye for an eye. It demands that there be an equal payment for the crime. But retributive justice is totally based on fear, and that's how things are designed in most situations. It's an empowerment of the system and a losing the empowerment within the context of community. And Zach argues, that it's in the context of community that healing actually occurs. If you think about it, even though you may do something against someone else, it's breaking the law. It's not really that you have offended them who you've really just hurt. You have breached the law. It's the law that is against you. That's what we're dealing with. It has removed the relationship that people have with one another and saying, no, what you did against someone else is really against the rules of the state. Is that what people of faith are supposed to necessarily always attribute to? Okay? So are we partially responsible for the fear that is in our communities, that is in our consciousness? There are plenty of anxiety mongers out there, that keeps everyone excited about everything and hard on crime and tougher and tougher and tougher. The emphasis always on fear. And since there is such an emphasis always on fear, is it surprising that we get exactly what we focus on? That's exactly what we get. And so I am calling this morning that you have a vision for a world that works for everyone. What kind of collective consciousness are we contributing to? We have to be light in darkness. That's what we're called to be. That is what that love that runs through us is designed for us to engage in it. Contrast that to restorative justice. Restorative justice is the crime is seen against the community and the person that you have offended. It is not against the state. The person who you have offended participates in the punishment and receives repayment for the offense. It's built in the context of community, not in the context of the prison system. And the focus is rehabilitation and creating supportive relationships. Now you say, how in the world, with the things that are going on in the world, can you believe for that? Because I have to believe for that. Because I have to. Because the people of faith have to believe more than what we necessarily possess at this time. We have to. We have to cast a vision that is bigger than anything that we can accomplish on our own because we are empowered by the Spirit. That is how it happens. It is beyond us. I don't know what to do, but the Spirit does know what to do. So it's all about restoring relationship and restoring community. That's what Zach is talking about. Is your neighborhood safe because you have police there, or is your neighborhood safe because you care about your community? I've never seen a policeman in my community. Okay? And I have nothing against police people. I love them dearly. Nothing against them whatsoever. But the victim in restorative justice participates in the punishment and the repayment. The offender is held accountable for their behavior, not just necessarily locked away. Okay? Because traumatized human beings recover in the context of relationships. We are relationship people. Now, Zach had 3 meaningful transformational experiences. The first one was at Harvard. He was at Harvard and he saw some of the same violations go on for students that were in school that he had experienced in Oakland. And he said at Harvard, there were systems there to restore them. They never got put out of school. They weren't expunged or anything else. They just created an environment for them to have a healthy recovery. He said in Oakland, you went to jail for the same thing. And this was transformative for him. He realized that not all communities are the same. Okay? So the second issue happened because a 14-year-old died in prison. Debatable whether or not it was suicide, but nonetheless, he died in prison. So let me tell you how he entered the system. He entered the system for truancy, for skipping school. Think about it. He ends up in the system because he skips school and he dies in prison. Well, why? Hyperactive teen, never treated, no health care, of course. We think it's a right, but other people don't. It started with him being a part of a youth home because his parents couldn't manage him any longer. Then he went to boot camp. Now, how in the world are you going to live in peace after somebody is screaming at you all day long in boot camp as a teen? And the thing is the boot camp was 6 hours away from his family. And of course, no public transportation. So how we destroy the community when we do things like this. Then he ends up in Preston prison. Preston prison. 23 hours a day he is in solitary. And 1 hour a day he has exercise, but he is shackled during the exercise. Tell me that's right for a 14-year-old. That's not right. $150,000 a year it takes to maintain someone in a youth prison. $150,000 a year. Therapy and counseling is far cheaper, which actually restores individuals. So what did we get for $150,000? Humiliation and isolation. Now, the third incident that was transformative for him was he and his family was out. He had some daughters and his wife, and they were out having dinner. When they arrived home, someone had broken into their home. He said, and fear entered into me, because what if my daughters had been there, right? So he has to make a choice. What do you do with this? He didn't abandon Oakland, though. He did something about it. He then engaged even more in community work, and he became to try to undo this issue of crime in Oakland. So he called the program Families for Books, Not Bars. Okay? And they have wonderful programs that still exist to this day. So our culture of fear, I argue, is really not working. And it certainly isn't working in relationship to children. It has been documented that the whole hype about super predators that start as children and they become chronic abusers throughout their life was all hype, because it occurred at a time that teen crime was actually decreasing. See, we have to always be careful. Where's the news coming from? And what are they saying? And who gets hurt by what they're saying? Crime was decreasing at the same time. Now, I have to say, I have great relationships with police people, but they are not mental health counselors. And we have resorted to forcing the police department to be our mental health system in California. That's who provides all the mental health support. I know. I work at the hospital. I see what goes on. That is not what they signed up for. That's not what they signed up for. So Zach gives recommendations about how things should change. He says there needs to be federal legislation and funding for child benefits, like that occurs in Germany and in Australia. He says that families that are in crisis should be in intensive therapy. They shouldn't necessarily be split up and their children taken away far distances from them for truancy of all sake. Who skipped school? You're all going to jail. Think about it. You're all going to jail. I skip school. I just go home now. My father was there saying, you just couldn't do it today, could you? I go, no. He suggested they improve the ratio between the number of students to teachers, and more importantly, the number of students to counselors, the people that are actually trained to do the work. We have to ask ourselves the question, is the teenage years about testing and breaking rules? That's what we do. So then we have a zero tolerance rule? So you have one offense and out you go? Really? One time and you're out. If you only had one time and you were out, how many of you would still be here? I know I wouldn't be. There's a whole lot of grace that ran down my life. Now I look back and kind of go, was I young and dumb or what? I was. School discipline in most instances is much better than making a teen a criminal, and putting them in a cage. I don't have children, but I just cannot imagine. I just cannot imagine anyone's children being in a cage. Now, These networks, he says families need to create networks, these families that have their loved ones that are in prison. He says, but they can't create networks organically because they're not allowed to talk to each other when they're waiting in line at the prison for visiting hours. It is shocking. It's shocking. I'm telling you, defund fear. It'll keep you up at night. But the thing he says, we need to close all of the prisons, and a number of them have been over time. We had 8 at one point in California. Most of them have been closed, but some of that abuse still actually occurs. He says that no one under 21 years of age should be tried in adult court. You know? And so you say, Rick, but look at what they did. I'm asking you to have a vision for something better than what goes on. I think if there is one thing I think about faith communities, is that our vision of possibility is just not big enough. If we can do it on our own, it ain't big enough. It needs the Spirit to make it possible. Other than that, it wouldn't happen. It's just something you can do on your own. And we appreciate the fact of what you do on your own, of course. But the vision for people of faith has to be for a better day. How did we get to the better day that we are in now? It is because people had vision that it was possible. And we have to hold on to that. Zach recommends that there should be universal health care. Why? So that teens can get mental health counseling before they're necessarily a part of the system. You know, by the way, you know when you're in prison, it's the best insurance that there is. It's amazing. You know, I work at a hospital 40 years. That's the best insurance in the country is prison, this insurance that prisoners get. Why in prison and not before you get there? I'm sorry. Did I miss the memo? To me, that just doesn't seem like it makes any sense. You know, should housing be a universal right? Should you have to fight for housing? In a minute, I don't know who we're going to have working at the hospital because I don't know how people are going to be able to live here. Should it be a universal right? The answer is yes. Is it an easy issue? No, it's not easy. But God knows they're building enough houses in my neighborhood. And I don't know who's going to buy those houses they put up in 30 days for the price they sold them for. That thing went up entirely too fast for me. We have to turn the other cheek toward restorative justice. We cannot punish people into necessarily changing. You didn't do the right thing, you just didn't get caught. I didn't get caught. And when I did, sometimes the police officer was kind of kind. I'm still praying for him right now. God love him, because the Lord knows I would not want to have to deal with Horace and Bernice. You know, we cannot continue to put people away so that we don't have to deal with the problem. If I had recognized in the dialogue with my director that he was just trying to make a connection with me and recognize that people of color are often judged before they are ever known. That's operating in faith. I was operating in fear. So it's easy to institute all this harsh punishment for people that we don't ever come in contact with. They're not a part of our community. It happens in the Bay. It doesn't happen here. It happens in the Bay. And we look like we can remove ourselves from that dialogue and as if we shouldn't be concerned about it. So I take us back again to our spiritual principle. What is the principle? It applies at all times for all people. And that is this: you have to treat all people the way you want to be treated, including teens. No exceptions, including the youth that are in prison. When we treat someone the way we don't want to be treated, we are the oppressor. We have bought into the system of oppression, and now we have decided to be the oppressor. We can't do it. The call to us is to always treat people the way we want to be treated, including our personal relationships, y'all. We'd get along a lot better in our personal relationships if we thought about that, right? Now, we are a people of vision, and we believe that people get second, third, fourth, fifth, however many chances they need for restoration. That's the way the system is supposed to work. Not one time and you're out. You have to do. We are people of faith that are shining the light on all people that are oppressed because we want a better day than the day that we're in. I'm not saying that everything that we experience now is wrong, but our vision has to be bigger than what we can accomplish on our own. We cannot abandon that big vision of a world that works for everyone. And it happens in community. It doesn't happen in prison. You know, here's the thing. With God, all things are possible. And with your vision and our vision, it can come to pass. And so it is. Amen. There are things that bother me, and teens in prison bothers me. Homeless people bother me. Because how have we become so cold and callous that we don't care? I know we do. And we have to have that vision for a world that works for everyone. Let us pray. Just knowing this, that with God, all things are possible. So we just cast that vision, that really big vision, a world that works for everyone, understanding that it can be so. We can be a part of making things change. Our consciousness of fear has to be exchanged for a consciousness of faith. And so it is. Amen. 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 Thank you. It's time for our offering, and I have changed the prayer. It's my first liberty. I know you will write me emails tonight, and I will read them lovingly because you will be writing me needing love. Today I proclaim my divine inheritance. I give this gift from a consciousness of abundance. Now with life and belief here, divine love blesses and prospers all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. And so it is. Come on.